climate policy, also farm to fork. Maybe you have heard that a zero pollution action plan is in the pipeline. But today we will talk about the EU biodiversity strategy, which was announced and adopted in May this year. So I don't need to remind you that we are in big trouble as far as biodiversity is concerned. We have the global assessment on biodiversity and ecosystem services, which was released by the Intergovernmental Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, IPBES, last year. And IPBES showed very clearly that indeed we are losing a lot of species and habitats, but that conservation policy, which would be, let's say, tackling what is on the right side of the slide, is not sufficient if we want to hold biodiversity loss, because this loss is due to direct pressures coming from terrestrial, freshwater and marine, and they have been ranked quantitatively this time for the first time. So starting with the land and sea use change, the direct exploitation of natural resources, including fishes, climate change impact, which is increasing, pollution, invasive alien species. These were the 5 main drivers of biodiversity loss worldwide. And these drivers are in fact the pressures coming from indirect drivers, and these indirect drivers are completely intertwined with our social economic developments. So unless we are serious about transforming our current model from consumption, production, and so on and so forth, we will not reverse biodiversity loss. That was the main message from last year. This is another important element. Röckström and the Stockholm Resilient Institute were trying to emphasize that the sustainable development goals are not all equal, because the socio-economic goals, which are at the top, are completely intertwined with the natural capital. If there is no natural capital, you can't have any social economic development. So therefore, our main attention should be on preserving our biosphere, and that's the reverse at the moment. Vice President Timmermans was saying recently, we don't need to save the planet, we need to save us. So why no? Why was this strategy adopted now? First, the current strategy is finishing at the end of this year, so we need a follow-up. We also need to start a big recovery of the European society. We have amazing amount of money available for recovery available, and by doing that, by the way, we are also putting a certain weight on the future generations, because we are borrowing money from them. So this money should be used to change our way of developing, and not to continue business as usual. At least that's what the president has in mind. And then the Convention on Biological Diversity has also to adopt a new post-2020 global biodiversity framework at its next conference of the parties, which was meant to take place in October this year, but of course, because of COVID, was postponed and is now postponed until the last quarter of next year, and maybe even early 2022. We don't know. So we don't start from scratch. We have a lot of information in the EU about what works and doesn't work. These are the assessments as they are, or the actions as they were adopted. This afternoon, the State of Nature 2020 will be launched by our commissioner, showing that the picture is still very gloom. And tomorrow, the first EU-wide ecosystem assessment will be released, also showing that the situation is quite bad. Even if some progress has been made, some pressures have decreased, still the level is far too high to have healthy ecosystems, and making sure that the services provided by them, like clean air, clean water, pollination, and so on, will remain sustainable. The strategy in a nutshell. So there are four main elements of it. The first one is about protecting nature. So this is conservation policy continuation, but expansion, because we want 30% of protected areas. We have 18% or a bit more at the moment in the EU, and at sea we have 10%, even less. So we want to have 30% protected areas at land and at sea. We also want them to be managed effectively and connected to allow for climate adaptation and mitigation. There is also a very important restoration plan. This restoration plan is quite comprehensive. I talk to it about it in a minute. And, um, and then a third important element are the enablers. If we want transformative change to happen, we need to enable them. It's not only about money, it's also about governance, and I'll come back to it in a moment. And we also want EU to push for an ambitious agenda worldwide. Protect nature, I told you. So the objective is to protect 30% of EU land and sea. Of course, it's based on Natura 2000, but it goes beyond. It includes nationally designated areas, and it will also connect these areas better, have buffer zones around them, and have strict protection, 10% strict protection within them. All growth forests, I forgot to say, primary and all growth forests, which is estimated to be less than 3% in Europe, will also need protection. Nature restoration, it's quite a very broad agenda. We want to develop legally binding target for restoration next year, prioritizing um, the most important ecosystems, like wetlands, for instance, which are important not only for biodiversity but also for climate change and recreation. And we are still losing wetlands in Europe. So that's an important element that we would like to put in legislation. But we will discuss that with member states and stakeholders. We are only at the moment discussing it internally. It will also be about some legally binding target for freshwater and marine ecosystems and beyond to the wider countryside, so agroecosystems, forest and urban. There won't be deterioration. There couldn't be, there shouldn't be any deterioration of any protected areas. So the expansion of protected areas shouldn't be at the expense of the existing ones. And so we want improvement of the conservation status by 30%. We would also like to have more extensive agriculture, or at least with less pressures. So organic farming should reach 25% in EU. We want to protect biodiversity landscape features like hedgerows and ponds and so on. Reduce the use and risk of pesticides by 50%. Reduce the pollution from fertilizer by 50% and their use by 20%. Plant 3 billion trees, but not any tree and not anywhere. So to reinforce carbon sequestration, but also biodiversity, and reverse the decline of pollinators. For these nature restoration plans, we have also emphasized the need to work on soils. You know that the soil directive has been pending for years. And so now we want to at least remediate contaminated soils sites in Europe. And we want to develop a soil strategy looking at how soil can be more resilient and retain carbon, more carbon um, in organic soils. So this is linked to the wetlands, the grassland, and also the forest to a certain extent. We want the free-flowing rivers to be restored because there are a lot of obstacles along our rivers, and this is bad for biodiversity, but also for flood protection and for water quality. There is a big focus on cities. We want to have a urban greening platform, a green city accord, and like we have for climate change, an agreement with the Covenant of the Mayors. We want invasive alien species to be substantially reduced. They are particularly important in cities, by the way. And in the marine environment, we want to protect some habitats, reduce the damage to seabed, and reduce bycatch. The enablers. Um, I want to say a few words on this new European governance framework. This governance framework is quite ambitious. It wants to strengthen decision making at multi-level, so from EU to from international, EU, national, local, and also multi-sectorial. As I said before, since the indirect drivers of loss need to be addressed in quite a commensurate way, it's very important that biodiversity is part of the agenda of all policy areas. So there is a need to design our governance. As part of this governance, we are also working on a monitoring framework, a monitoring and review framework. And this is in fact to increase the accountability of countries, of the Commission, of stakeholders, business, into the actions that they are committing to. In the 2030 biodiversity strategy, there are more than 100 of actions. So we need now to implement them. We are developing a tracking system for the commitments within the Commission. We are involving all Commission services in implementing these actions. And we want to use some headline indicators to assess progress on these actions and make these indicators available to all so that in a transparent way, we are also launching tomorrow a knowledge base for biodiversity. And this should be the infrastructure to make this information available to all. And with this, we also hope to have further analysis from science to tell us if the ambition is sufficient to revert the biodiversity loss. So it's quite different from what we have had in the past. And it's in a way getting closer to the climate policy where you have this accountability of parties on their emission agenda and IPCC regularly coming back and assessing whether we are on track or not. We also want to unlock a big part of the European budget for biodiversity. This is an ongoing discussion to increase the business engagement, knowledge, education, and promote nature-based solutions wherever we can. For the global agenda, as you know, we are currently negotiating with the different countries of the world. We want ambitious goals and targets. We want also to increase the means of implementation, in particular also the accountability, the indicators, which will have to be reported by all the parties and the EU to see whether we are on track or not. So we want to have a stronger implementation and monitoring and review, a fair and equitable share of the benefits from the use of genetic resources, and a principle of equality. We are using the EU Green Diplomacy, the International Ocean Governance Process, We are also addressing for the first time substantially the trade policy and the sustainable impact assessment to see how our trade negotiations are impacting biodiversity ecosystems and their services, and also reinforcing our international cooperation. Next steps, as I guess you want to know what will happen next. As I said, within the Commission, we have developed this tracking tool to assess progress on the implementation of the different actions. These different actions, for these different actions, we have identified the leaders. So it's not necessarily the biodiversity unit or even DG Environment. It can be DG Agriculture, DG Trade, depending on the action itself. We are developing a monitoring framework with a set of indicators to assess progress, and these indicators are also being adopted between DG Environment and the other services to be consistent across policy areas. We are waiting for the reaction of the Council, Parliament, Committee of the Regions and Social and Economic Committees. The Council conclusions are being discussed right now. There is a council in Luxembourg, and which will adopt by Thursday the council conclusions on the EU biodiversity strategy. There was a first biodiversity summit on the 30th of September and the United Nations General Assembly. I'm sure you heard about it, and there were some important alliance commitments, pledges made on this occasion by many countries of the world, including the EU and its member states. And so we are preparing for the next CBD COP in 2021. So this is in a nutshell what I wanted to present to you, and I'm ready if you have any question to answer them. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your interesting presentation. I will now switch to my colleague Ina for some questions.
Hello everyone, welcome to the webinar. I have looked at the chat, but I don't see any questions for the moment. So if you have a question for a commission speaker, you can write it in the chat, and then we ask it for you to answer the question. So, but I don't see any question until now, Celeste. So I ask the people, if you have a question, just use the chat, and then we will come back for the questions. So I have a look. Hi, I have. Okay, they're coming now. One moment, please. So there's a question. How is the 50% reduction in pesticide use defined?
Yes, thank you very much. So all these targets have been agreed at Commission level, so not only by DG Environment, but also by all Commission services. So this target of 50% reduction has been agreed between us and DG Santé, dealing with pesticides. And now, of course, we have to go into more detail about pesticide sales, pesticides risk, the meaning of pesticides, what pesticides, and so on and so forth. So indeed, the devil is in the detail. Which has been recently, we have I think last week adopted, as well as the AIDS Environment Program. Pesticides were not part of it, but there is this zero pollution action plan that I was referring to. The zero pollution action plan is being prepared by DG Environment together with the other Commission services, and should be adopted next year with a monitoring framework as well. So this is where the 50% pesticide reduction will be completely clearly defined and indicators associated to it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for this answer. I don't see another question for the moment, so Celeste, I propose that you, yeah, we have the other speakers, so I give the word back to you, Celeste.
Thank you very much. I guess we will go on with the next speakers. So I will now give the floor to Professor François Reynaud from University of Hasselt.
Yes, hello everybody. I see there is a question in the chat that just arrived. Should we answer this one first, Celeste, or?
Yes, maybe we can do just one more question if our speaker from the Commission is still here. So there's a question: do you think the current CAP proposals to be voted by the European Parliament are in line with the EU Green Deal, the EU Biodiversity Strategy, and the Farm to Fork Strategy?
Aha, yes, this is a really embarrassing question. No, indeed. I mean, we are not happy with the current CAP proposal. We are, yeah, we have. I didn't say that, but during the design of the biodiversity strategy, we had the most difficulties with agricultural policy, with the bio-based energy policy and trade policy. So I'm very frank with you. So these were the areas which were the most difficult to where to find an agreement. So the CAP is still not ambitious enough. We will also look at the national strategies to see whether they correspond to our assessment. But indeed, we are waiting for some ambition from the European Parliament to, to increase the ambition, to have the European Parliament increasing the ambition. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now on to you, Professor François Reynaud.
Yes, hello again everybody. I'm going to share my screen now. Okay, so please let me know if there's a problem with the presentation. So yeah, my name is François Reynaud. I'm from Hasselt University. And I'm going to speak about climate change and Island ecosystem services. And there seems that there's no link with biodiversity. There is one. I will come back to that later. It's actually the core of the subject. So I'm going to speak about how we study that using the infrastructure that you see in the picture that's called the Ecotron, which is basically a climate change simulator. And it's not a work that we are doing alone. We're actually a group of more than 50 people, 50 scientists from all over Europe working on that. I'm just the PI in this case. So let me first explain you the context of it. Why climate change? Why Islands? And what's the link with biodiversity? And for that, we need to go back a little bit in history and look at the landscape. European landscape, especially in northwestern Europe, was dominated by Islands some centuries ago. As this is depicted in this painting, and you see a flat landscape with plenty of shrubs and sheep. And nowadays, this is, for example, what's happening in Flanders. So nowadays, we see that the Island landscape is much less dominant. And this is what is left. Basically, these are Natura 2000 protected Island habitats, right, that are mostly to a large extent concentrated in Limburg. So what happened? How come Island disappeared that much in the last century? Well, urbanization is an answer. It took its toll on the Island landscape. But also, natural evolution. The Island ecosystem evolves like any ecosystem if you leave him a little bit of time. So the natural evolution of Island is actually to go towards a forest. And the Island was maintained for centuries in northwestern Europe thanks to sheep grazing. So the sheep getting some grazing pressure that was disturbance that was preventing the ecosystem to evolve toward forest. And as raising sheep became less and less profitable, then this ecosystem slowly started to evolve to forest. So nowadays, if you want to maintain Island, we need to manage it, basically to replace the sheep. So that's the natural trajectory, natural evolution of this ecosystem. It becomes a forest if you live in time. There is something a bit more recent that happens, especially where there is lots of nitrogen deposition, especially a problem in our neighbors in the Netherlands. Where you have nitrogen deposition, there is lots of mineral nitrogen coming as precipitation in the precipitation. And that falls into a heathland ecosystem where it's usually scarce. And therefore, the heathland plants are not used to take advantage of this easily available inorganic nitrogen. That's actually almost like fertilization. And the heathland plants are there outcompeted by grasses such as Molinia or the Sciancia genera that you see in the picture here. And these plants are actually just faster at taking up inorganic nitrogen. So therefore, you have different trajectories. Either the heathland remains a heathland, either it becomes a forest, either it becomes grassland. And the question is, how will climate change enter the equation? Will it accelerate these dynamics? If yes, in which direction? And we don't really have an answer for that at the moment. There are some elements of response, but they are too partial to give an overall picture on it. And that's what we want to do. What we want to do is to use our climate change simulator, if you like, to see how heathland will respond to climate change, in which direction it will go. And you may ask, why do we care about that? Will it have an impact on us? Probably not. And that's not the case. It will have very likely an impact because, like any ecosystem, it provides us with services. In the past, it used to be fertilizers. That was the use of plug and soil, so we'll not come back to that. But nowadays, these are areas that are mostly recreational. So there are people that are moving there to bike, to hike, to enjoy nature. It's also an ecosystem that sequesters carbon, so climate regulation in the sense of carbon sequestration here, like any ecosystem where there are plants. It's also an area where there is groundwater, because the soil there is sandy and it's therefore very draining. So where it rains, there is lots of groundwater recharge. So important for water supply. There is also some pollination service, but also negative services or disservices, if you like. So such as fires, even in our very temperate Belgian climate, and ticks as well. And the idea is that if the heathland ecosystem evolves because of climate change into forests or in the direction of grassland, probably the pattern of ecosystem services that are delivered will change, and this will have an impact on us, therefore, as a society. So what we want also to do is that we have a whole interdisciplinary consortium. We are also working with environmental economists who are helping us to tackle this question and to estimate afterwards if we have a change in ecosystem services, what will be the societal impact in terms of costs. So now, how is that linked at all with biodiversity? It is linked because, to a large extent, these ecosystem services will depend on the structure of the soil food web. So the soil food web is working this way. You have the plants that are picking up carbon dioxide and nutrients, and these plants are building up organic matter, which is shed every year in the soil. And then it's eaten by microbes that are primary consumers, so bacteria and fungi, that are themselves eaten by secondary and higher level consumers. And at each level of this soil food web, there are some nutrients released and there is some CO2 released by decomposition. Therefore, the soil food web and how it interacts with plants is very important because it controls the soil processes of decomposition, how much CO2 is released at every step, and mineralization, how many nutrients are released at every step. And therefore, it also affects the ecosystem services that are linked with these soil processes, such as carbon sequestration and water quality, because carbon sequestration is the balance between decomposition and photosynthesis, and water quality depends also on how many nutrients are leaching out of this soil food web. So not only ecosystem services depend on the soil food web structure, but beyond that, the soil food webs are very often bottom-up controlled, which means that the primary consumers have more important, more structural role than the upper consumers. So if the soil food web is dominated at the basis by fungi or by bacteria, that will have cascading influence on the structure of the soil food web and how nutrients and energy and water is flowing. Therefore, if we want to understand mechanistically how the ecosystem services are affected, we also need to investigate biodiversity and what is actually stemming from the changes in especially microbial diversity, so microbial communities. So for that, we can look at species diversity, but we can also look at the functions they perform, how diverse they are, especially in terms of decomposition and mineralization. These are two functions, but there are plenty of sub-functions. Which substrate do they decompose? Which substrate do they mineralize? And also the rate at which they do so. So what do we expect? We expect that as climate will become more extreme, there will be increased disturbance for the plants, therefore increased mortality because of more frequent and more extreme climate conditions, which should, in general, favor species that grow fast because they will just be able to be they are more resilient and more resistant, and therefore will be able to recover faster than other species. And in the heathland landscape, that translates as grasses have more ruderal tendencies. They are not as ruderal as some other plants, of course, but they have more ruderal tendency than heather. Therefore, we expect, in fact, the ecosystem to evolve towards a grassland. And we expect to have the same tendency towards more ruderal species among soil communities. And since, as a general rule, there are plenty of exceptions, of course, but as a general rule, ruderal species have a lower carbon, nutrient, and water use efficiency, the carbon, nutrient, and water cycles should be less tight. We should lose a little bit of each at every step, which means that we would there expect a decrease in carbon sequestration and a decrease in water quality. Anyway, so how do we tackle that? We use Ecotron facility, so climate change simulator, where it's a large-scale infrastructure where we have different chambers. In each chamber that is gas tight, we have a lysimeter that contains some soil and plants that were taken from the field and that is exposed to different conditions that we control. So we control all of these parameters in bold, and we also additionally measure other ones. And with that, we are able to expose heathlands to different climates and to monitor its response at a very high frequency. So what kind of climate do we use? We worked for that with some colleagues that are climatologists from the VLEVA and from the PTH that provided us with some different climate scenarios that were following the worst case scenario, RCP 8.5 for the ones who know about the IPCC. So the worst case scenario, we will continue burning fuel at the same rate. And these are different projections of this scenario locally here in Belgium at different time points in the future. And this is what we use to expose our as a climate for the heathland ecosystem here. So we have 6 units, and every unit is exposed to a different climate. So this is therefore a gradient approach, and it has an influence on the way we analyze the data later. It's not replicated, but gradual. So what are the results then? We may ask. So the experiment started in January this year. We start to have some results that are interesting, but I will not show them yet because it's too early, in the sense that if we want to draw conclusions, we need to wait at least 3 years, that the variability between years starts to be a little bit less buffered, that we see the effect of climate a bit more than the effect of weather. But what we can do, however, is independently from climate to see what are the effects of a change in dominant plants, because these we can measure, we can see in the fields. What is the effect of having a heathland-dominated ecosystem as compared to the grassland-dominated one? For that, so independently from climate. So for that, we made a field observatory in the field where we have different plots, 13 plots in total, with an ever-increasing concentration or dominance of grass, in this case, Molinia cellular. And we measured different parameters. First one, we looked at the bacterial community structure using metabarcoding. So it's looking at DNA, based on DNA, and looking at the different species of bacteria you have. So it doesn't go as deep in the phylogeny and species, but we can see here, for example, at the phylum level, so higher in the phylogeny of bacteria, you have the percentage of grass in the area in the horizontal axis, and in the vertical axis, the relative abundance of the phylum. And you see that there is no significant influence whatsoever of grass invasion. And we can do that at different, I did that at different phylogenetic levels, and it's always the case. There is only very minor effect of grass invasion on the structure of the bacterial communities, which in a way is good news. For fungi, this appeared exactly the same. So here we are one level down in the phylogeny. But again, doing that at all phylogenetic levels, there are only a few groups that are slightly sensitive to grass invasion. So overall, it seems that microbial community structure is not affected by a change in dominant plants. If we look at the diversity of it now, so again, using the same data, but measuring the Simpson diversity index, there is no significant difference. In blue are the bacteria, in red are the fungi. You see that the grass cover percentage does not have an influence on the diversity. Same for Shannon index, I just don't show it here. So no effects on taxonomic diversity. If we look now at the functional diversity, so the range of carbon substrates that can be degraded. So in terms of decomposition, how many substrates they can access to? For that, we use ecoplates, for the ones that are a bit aware. So we exposed microbial communities to plenty of different carbon sources. And from that, we can derive a diversity index. We see again that there is no impact. So it's not that the change in dominant plants has an impact in diversity in decomposition in different carbon substrates. However, what was clear is that if you group these different substrates in chemical families like carbohydrates, amino acids, and so on, you always see the same trend, except for phenolics where it was not significant. You see that the more grass you have, the faster or the higher the decomposition rate. It means that carbon mineralization activities overall increase. So not the diversity of them, so not how many substrates you degrade, but the rate at which you do it. So was it due just simply to the fact that microbes were more active? No, we measured also the metabolic activity of microbes using a proxy, that is fluorescein diacetate assay. And we saw there that there is no significant impact of grass cover in microbial activity. So let's wrap it up. If we expect the heathland ecosystem to evolve towards a grassland, will it have an impact on the soil food web? What we see, at least by looking at microbes, is that more grass does not mean communities that are more diverse. This does not mean a shift in the structure of the microbial community, so more or less the same species are there, except rare ones. There is not more microbial activity. There is not a broader mineralization spectrum. It's more or less the same range of carbon sources that are mineralized and decomposed. But we see that the mineralization rate is higher, which should, in theory, could lead to a lower carbon sequestration. But this depends, of course, on the photosynthesis rate, because it could be that the plants are actually photosynthesizing more, and this actually compensates this higher carbon mineralization activities. That's it. I think I'm done with my time. I saw some questions coming on the chat. I didn't have the time to look at it. I apologize for that, but we probably can answer them now. Thank you for your attention.
Yes. Thank you for your very interesting presentations. I guess Ina has some questions for us.
Yes, I see one about, I see two. One, I start with the last one. Treats will not be changed to different units in subsequent seasons. I think, how do you cope with spatial differences between units that can be confounded with frequent effects, since you have no replications?
Yeah, so that's indeed the debate that was very hot in that still is replication or gradients. If gradients, how come it's not replicated? Gradient approach has its drawbacks and its advantages. It is possible to have a gradient approach if you expect that the effect of your treatment is more important than the noise. So what we try to do is to minimize the noise at the beginning of the experiment, which was not that easy. I have to acknowledge that. Because well, we try to take the samples, the soil samples with the plants from the same plot that was as uniform as possible. And we took that the vegetation also in terms of dominance of hazel was the same as well. I try to measure also all the possible parameters in every unit before we start the experiment, that we don't have a trend already before the beginning of the experiment. So I randomize the different units before the beginning of the experiment. Now, if we want to see an impact of the climate, well, we have to hope that the impact of climate will be stronger than that. Yes. So that's definitely something that is not easy to deal with. I agree on that.
Okay, I think that will do. I have another rather a comment. I doubt whether heathland is sequestering carbon. Usually it's stored by removing carbon-rich topsoil, and it's sustained by limiting biomass growth and controlled fire. And then the person itself they agree with water infiltration, however. So I think that question is solved. I give people some other time for questions because I want to come back to our speaker of the commission, Antelle. I see that we have another question for you. It's about, do you also, Ms. Teller, I hope you can unmute yourself because there's another question for you. And the question sounds like, do you also aim for a reduction of bio-based pesticides?
Yeah, I mean, I told you, I mean, all these will be addressed in detail in the zero pollution strategy action plan. So that's not sorted out yet, but that's a matter of months, and member states and stakeholders will also be consulted. So I'm sure you will have ample opportunity to comment, but it's work in progress, so I can't commit to the final outcome.
Okay, so we will have to wait for another few weeks then. I look at the chat if we have another question over here. I don't see any question left, Celeste, so I give the word to you.
All right, thank you. If all questions have been asked, I will now switch to our next speaker, Frank Stubbe from VLM.
Yes, thank you, Celeste. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you all hear me loud and clear. I will give an explanation about working together between the CAP and cohesion funds, namely Interreg, and it's about Interreg North Sea region. I will share my screen. So I work at VLM, and my position at VLM is I'm head of agri-environmental measures at Region West of VLM, where I work together with, I call it business planners. These are colleagues of me that go to farmers and to try to convince them to take measures against the remuneration for biodiversity targets. So our project is called Partridge or Partridge. The partridge is in fact a flagship species where we work for, but we work for enhancement of biodiversity by 30% against 2023. That's our ambition, that we increase biodiversity and that we try to restore it on farmland and work together with farmers and also to make it for a farmer profitable. We have across North Sea region 10 demosites. In Belgium, we have, or in Flanders, it's in Flanders, we have a demosite at Ramskapelle and one at Assenede. In the UK, we have two in England and two in Scotland, nearby Edinburgh. In the Netherlands, we have one in Zeeland and one in Brabant. And then we have two demosites in Göttingen.
Sorry, Frank, we don't see your presentation. You have to share the presentation with the participants. Sorry,
yes.
Sorry.
Yeah, I understand. Wait a moment.
You have to go downstairs. It's yeah. Okay. you find it.
Yeah, I forgot it. You all see my screen now? It's okay now? I hope so. So I started first slide. And you see the demo sites across the North Sea. I hope you see them well. So you see also our logo. It's funded by Interreg North Sea region. And we want to increase or enhance biodiversity at 10 demo sites. And now I will explain how we work. First of all, I also want to mention something that we made a booklet. And in this booklet is explained how we do it and which measure we do, and it's all based on scientific evidence. And you can find the booklet, if you speak Dutch, you have below, and I think the presentations here will be available for everyone. You can download it, and if you want it in English, you have to send an email to Francis Bühner. You have here his email address. So we try to enhance biodiversity by using CAP money. It's Pillar 2 agri-environmental measures, and we also integrate some innovative measures paid by Interreg money. Here you see some pictures where we work to enhance biodiversity by the introduction of 7 to 10% high quality habitat measures implemented in each demo area. Here you have the demo area of Isabella polder, and you see the measures in different colors. And here we have more than almost 10% measures, and the measures are divided in, we call it a partridge mix is one measure. We have 18 hectares there. And this mix of seed mixtures is developed by the Partridge project team. We work together with more practical research center like Inagro in Flanders, but we also work together with the University of Göttingen, where they have a lot of experience with that seed mixture, and also some scientists of the UK and Switzerland who follow up the add value of some seeds. We also then have 23 hectares of measures paid by the CAP, unharvested cereals, 7 measures and 7 hectares. And we have also introduced in Isabella polder 2 beetle banks. This was the first time in Flanders we have introduced beetle banks. This we need to have a permit for that. This was a little challenge to tackle that, to have an environmental permit, but this gives some insects the opportunity to have to be more dry on their feet during the season. Here we have some ideas of our seed mixtures we use. We discussed that within the partnership, if we increase the share of some species or not. Here we have the demo site at Ramskapelle. An idea of our demo site and where are the measures located. Here we have also more than 10% measures. I have also to say that we work together with the Hunters Association of Flanders, and they also try to set up some winter feeding. We have some discussions about that, but it's okay. We have agreed within the partnership. We look at it and we follow it by cameras. What is the added value of winter feeding by the tons? Here we have also 1 beetle bank introduced and almost 5 hectares unharvested cereals, mixed grass strips and partridge mix. So I already short explained our partnership in Flanders. So VLM is a kind of coordinator for Flanders, where Inagro works especially in Ramskapelle polder, where they think about more practical things, how it could be more, how farmers can take it up and how we can change the mixtures and what's the added value and how it can be integrated more in farm management. Then we work together with Boeren en Natuur. That's the follow-up of EcoSquare and is Assenide, and at INBO is responsible for the method of the monitoring for the whole project. And they follow up the monitoring in each demo site. I will shortly explain what we monitor, and then we have the Hunters Association, Hunters We try to communicate a lot with all stakeholders because we believe that if you work in demo sites with enough coverage of habitat measures, that you will enhance biodiversity a lot. And that's the only way we should work in the future, where we have enough measures in a small area. And we try to convince farmers. We do a lot of farm-to-farm walks. We work also with hunters, advisors, non-governmental organizations, scientists. And we also try to convince local, regional, and national authorities to enhance or to support us in our approach. Here we even had in the Netherlands at our demo site and nearby Breda, the European Commissioner of the former European Commissioner of Agriculture, who came to our demo site there. So we do have a lot of meetings with all kind of people that work on farmland, especially every year. One of the pictures goes about dividing of the seeds. We every year divide the seeds and discuss with the farmers how they should bring or implement or maintain their measures on the ground. So we already have successfully increased the biodiversity at our demo sites. We have some proof of that. We monitor partridges, of course, the key species, but also hares, birds, especially songbirds, and insects. Here you see two things, pitfalls and pan traps. The monitoring of the insects, because that's at the start. We have more birds, we need more insects. We see at the partridge mix, at the mixed grass strip plus and pitfall traps, a lot of more specimen of insects, and compare it with wheat, also in both areas, in comparison with normal cultures. If you look at the pan traps, where we also try to investigate the abundance of insects, we see most insects in partridge mixes, wheat some, in mixed grass strips also, but we see, especially in Ramskapelle, it's a little bit for us strange that we also see a lot of specimen of insects in beets, especially in sugar beets. Then we monitor also, of course, the grey partridge. And I didn't explain it already, but we monitor in our demo sites, but we also compare it to control sites where we don't do any measures. So we look if our demo sites increase faster and better than in our control sites. Here we have at Isabella's polder, we have the two colors, the control and the demo. We also are depending on some external factors that we don't can control, but we see in Ramskapelle that the demo site increases better than at the control sites. At the second figure, you see the line, the vertical line is no change, and you look at the right, at the dashed line, that's the 30% increase. In Isabella polder, for the grey partridge, we have already reached, and not in Ramskapelle. Also for the hares, but we see that also we monitor the earthworms, and we try during the project. We did have a lot of activities together with farmers, and Ramskapelle in Agro takes care of that, and in Asseni it's Boeren en Natuur. We try to create a sense of pride among our stakeholders, and also we invite consumers. And in the Netherlands, they produced pancake at demo sites, pancake powder, and also already a beer brewed by barley at places where there are measures are. And we are convinced that it is possible to enhance biodiversity, but you have to look at the balance between an arable, viable food system and good remuneration for farmers if they do measures for biodiversity. And the farm-to-fork strategy is a unique chance to make Europe more wildlife friendly and healthy for us all. And I want to conclude my presentation that we are convinced that it is possible to enhance biodiversity, and we are also convinced that our approach can inspire decision makers to make Europe greener and more sustainable. And for us, it's a challenge that CAP money should be also more integrated, or cohesion money between the two funding systems in Europe to work together, so that we can learn from each other. And we learned a lot about monitoring, about seed mixtures, how we can convince farmers between the regions. And this, if you take a farmer from Flanders, go to England, and he sees there's something that he doesn't see in Flanders, that convinces him immediately. We saw that we went with farmers from our region to there, and this is, I think, it should be supported more by Europe, this kind of working together. And I want to thank you all for listening. I'm ready, Celeste.
Thank you, Frank, for your interesting presentation. I see Ina has a question for us.
Yes, there's one very interesting question for you, Frank. It's about agroforestry. For instance, cows and other animals can graze under trees. This protects them also from heat waves, which will become more and more common. So what about agroforestry?
Yeah, that's true what is what the question is, but in our project we try to enhance arable birds. Agroforestry is not the instrument to enhance, I think, arable birds. It has another purpose. It has more an enhanced of carbon sequestration to make water better available, etc. Here we have another purpose.
Yeah. Okay, I see. Then I see another question for Frank. Coming up, another one too. Could the farms also participate in biodiversity monitoring on the ground?
Yeah, we try to do that. We try to create more and more citizens kind of belief, or the challenge. In fact, the challenge is that the farmers know better what birds need, and it's also a challenge that when they do cultivate their land, they should take care of the nesting birds. This is already a challenge, because when a farmer cultivates his land, he doesn't know that there is a bird nesting, and we should communicate more with volunteers that count birds and farmers that cultivate their land, so that if farmers are aware that there is a nesting bird, he won't destroy him and or her. This is a real challenge, that we bring farmers more together with nature, with people who watch birds and know where the birds are nesting.
Okay. So then from yes. Bird countings, we're going to insect countings. I see. It's I have to see. It's rather small. For the insect countings, are only numbers counted, or also species? And it's also looked at the functionality of the insects.
Yeah, that's also a challenge to look at functionality. If you look at each species has a function, but we especially monitored the number and weight of the species. To look at family, this costs a lot more, and we need more fundamental research to do that. We are limited in our budget.
So a lot of work to do.
Yes, it's a big challenge to look at the function, or of course, but we did research on weight, but this is the start.
Mm-hmm.
Have more weight on insects, then you know that it works.
Okay, then I come to the next question, a very practical one. How did you convince farmers to participate in this project? Did you go through farming organizations, or did you contact the farmers directly?
VLM contact the farmers directly through our business. Mm-hmm. They are used to talk to farmers, and we start always with the kind of ambassador who is already taking initiatives and who believes in the system, and with how he works, convinces his neighbors and other farmers in his surroundings. So we have a lot of habitat measures already on the 2 demo sites. If we could have more demo sites like that across Flanders, if we could have maybe 100 or more than 100, then we should have more and more places where we enhance biodiversity. We are convinced of that. But it takes some time to convince farmers, and it's about trust, building trust between the farmers and government and between the farmers.
Yeah, okay. I'm looking for another question. I don't see them at the moment, but for people who have a question, still a question, they can use the chat. I think we will go for a break now, so I will give the word to my colleague Celeste, and she will...
Yes, Ina, thank you. Thank you very much for all the interesting questions. We will take a little break now, and I will see you all back in 10 minutes. Okay, welcome back, everyone. I will now give the floor to our next speaker, Eline van Utrecht from Vito.
Okay. Now everybody can hear me? Okay, I hope so. If not, please give a sign. So good afternoon. I said as a researcher and developer of Vito's climate services team, I have contributed to the development of the climate information service for biodiversity. That's a Copernicus climate change service. And in the coming 15 minutes, I will introduce you to this service. Let me switch to the presentation mode so that's more useful for you. We can hear from different sides that biodiversity and ecosystem services, which are crucial to human well-being, are under pressure. Climate change has a growing role in this deterioration. This was also written in the IPBES report, the Global Assessment Report, as you can see here. So certain areas that are suitable, that have suitable habitats for different species can become unsuitable due to climatic changes like temperature increases or differences in rainfall patterns. And this holds for iconic species like Baltic seals that you see here on the screen, but also for different ecosystems like forests, tropical forests, but also temperate forests or grasslands. And it's very important to assess the impact and to design restoration or conservation measures. And therefore, we need climatic data to assess what the impact of climate change is and which management options we have, which restoration options we have, and whether these options are also robust. So climate data, excuse me, climate data can help to assess this. So that's the reason why we designed the climate service for biodiversity. It's officially the Copernicus sectoral information system for global biodiversity, and it's a tailored climate information service. So it gives tailored climate information really customized to the needs of different stakeholders. It's comprehensive, meaning that it includes 80 relevant bioclimatic indicators, has a global coverage, so for the whole globe, a high resolution. So that is due to in-house screening, excuse me, but my screen is automatically changing. What I was saying, it comes at high resolution. So thanks to in-house downscaling techniques, it's timely. So it gives you information for the past and the future. It's reliable because it's based on the Copernicus database, about which I will say a word in a minute. And it's bias corrected, at least for the future projections that we provide. It's bias correction against current data. And it also includes useful applications to visualize, for example, the data. So it's not only data, but really useful applications, and it's freely available. And in this talk, I will give you more information about the basis of this service, but also the process that we went through to come to the service and the service itself, of course. So what's the basis? That's the Copernicus Climate Change Service. Copernicus is the European Union program for Earth observation. So Copernicus looks at the Earth and the environment from above to benefit all the people of the planet, not only European people, but all the people. And Copernicus works in different thematic domains, and climate change is one of them. And it's within this domain that the climate data store exists. And this is a platform where a lot of climatic data is available. Data for the past as well as for the future, observed with satellites, but also in weather stations and modeled to complete series, and also for the future, it's based on model simulations. Copernicus, the climate change service, makes this available, the enormous amount of climatic data, through its climate data store. But the data is often there in formats that are not easily accessible to different people. And it's really the aim of the Copernicus program to unlock the wealth of data. Aim is also the basis of the sectoral information systems that Copernicus initiates, and the climate service that I'm presenting now to you is part of this sectoral information system for biodiversity specifically. There are more sectoral information systems, example on agriculture or tourism, but today the focus is on the one for biodiversity, of course. So how do we do that? Unlocking data of what do we mean with that? It means that we convert raw climatic data that comes in unattractive formats to tailored, really customized bioclimatic information. So here on the right of this slide, of this figure, you see the wealth of data that is available, that is being collected by Copernicus and stored in the climate data store infrastructure. And then the developer, which is us, Vito, for example, comes in to make the data available. And we do not do that alone. We work together with different expert organizations, biodiversity experts, including NGOs, national and international NGOs, but also commercial organizations, as well as research organizations. And those experts help us to identify what are the specific stakeholder needs of people in the biodiversity and ecosystem services community, what kind of data they need, how they want it to be presented, and then we convert it to useful information in accessible graphs and maps, for example. Our aim was to make a global service with university relevant data sets of bioclimatic indicators. So there's 80 bioclimatic indicators included. What is an example of such a bioclimatic indicator? It can be an essential climate variable like air temperature, for example, annual mean air temperature, but also precipitation. But there's more. There are also very specific and derived climatic variables, like the bioclim variables, which are well known in the biodiversity community. For example, precipitation in the driest quarter, but also information about aridity or growing season, the length of the growing season, or the number of frost days, for example. To make it a bit less dry, we do not only offer those indicators, but we also illustrate the relevance of the service to by applying it in 6 diverse use cases. And those use cases cover a wide range, so they're applied to the terrestrial as well as the marine sphere. It includes animal species as well as plant species. So in the upper part of the figure, you see that there is a use case on pelagic fish worldwide. There's one on the reproduction of seals in the Baltic area. There's one on grassland ecosystems also in the Baltic area. And under the map, you see a golden-headed lion tamarin, which habitat is situated in Brazil. There's also one use case that looks at tropical forest restoration in Central Africa. And there's one case on European hedgerows, that's buffer strips in agricultural ecosystems, that also make use of the open climate information that comes from the service that we developed. And those use cases are all associated with the different partners in this project. During the process, we really applied the co-creation process to develop the service, meaning that we involved a lot of stakeholders through questionnaires, workshops in different parts of the globe worldwide, and some bilateral interviews to know what stakeholder needs were. So in order to make the service as tailored as possible, as relevant as possible to different stakeholders in the biodiversity community. So what is included in the service that we offer It's those data sets of 80 bioclimate indicators, but it's also applications. And one universal application is the Bioclimate Explorer, which allows user stakeholders to visualize those each of those 80 bioclimatic indicators. So here you see a screenshot of the service. This is what the Bioclimatic Explorer visualized for annual mean temperature. It does that for the past, but also for the future. This is an image from for the far future to 2100 for RCP 8.5, but there are different scenarios available, and you can also choose to see the output from an ensemble of different climate models, but you can also choose to visualize it for one specific climate model that is included. Here you see a selection of the different variables, so you can choose any of the 80 available bioclimatic indicators. This is another indicator, aridity in the warmest quarter, also an indicator that is included. And if you click on a location, here I chose Mexico, then you will also be given information about the trend. How does this variable aridity changes over time from the past in the left of this graph below to the right, and you see in green and purple the different RCPs, so the different scenarios. Apart from the Bioclimate Explorer, we also have another application, the Climate Suitability Explorer, which visualizes again the bioclimatic indicator of interest, but additionally you can add a minimum and maximum value in between your specific species, for example, can survive, and then you can visualize how the suitability would change towards the future, with red colors indicating which areas would not be suitable anymore for a certain species, and green colors where the area would still be suitable. This is a kind of screening tool for climate suitability for specific species. If you need very detailed equations, complex equations to simulate the ecological niche of a certain species, then you can also download all the information that is in the service and apply it in your own downstream application, of course. Next to these two universal applications, we also have the use case illustrations. And then I come back to my gray seal of the beginning of the presentation. Here we work together with partners from Estonia, Promare, and the Baltic Environmental Forum. And for them, it was important to know what the sea ice concentration would be in the future, because these seals, they give birth to their pups on the ice, and they raise their pups in the first weeks on the ice. And they're not used to do that on the land. So if in the future there wouldn't be any ice anymore in the Baltic Sea, that would mean a problem for those seal populations. And here you see the sea ice concentration in the month of March for the historical period. And if I switch to the next slide, you see the situation for the end of the century, pessimistic climate change scenario. And there you see that there will be less ice in the Baltic Sea and the Gulf of Finland. For them, it was also important to know wind direction and velocity, because this also has an impact on the type of ice. And with this information, they can assess what the impact of climate change would be for reproduction of these seals. So there's a lot more that I can tell you about this climate service, that I can tell and show you, especially for the different use cases, which are attractive to see. If you want to learn more, please join us this Thursday, 22nd of October, because then we organize an online conference totally dedicated to free or open climate information for biodiversity. You can join it through this link, or just send me a message and I can forward you some information. So thank you for your attention. If you have questions, then please, I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you very much, Eline, for your very interesting presentation. I see Ina has a question for you.
Yes, there is a question for Elina. Could Copernicus help monitor biodiverse landscape features in agro ecosystems? There is an objective of 10%. but the current Capri model used by DG Agri doesn't allow for it.
Is it really about monitoring landscape?
Could Copernicus help monitor biodiverse landscape features in agro ecosystems?
So if it's really about monitoring, I mean, Copernicus has advanced techniques to use satellites, techniques to monitor really landscapes, but that's not, of course, what this climate service is about. Climate service can, well, I would suggest to explore it and see whether certain bioclimatic indicators can be interesting for assessing impacts on landscape feature in agro ecosystems. One of our partners and one of the use cases is using our service for an application in an agro ecosystem. So certainly there's scope for using it. About the Capri model, I don't know exactly what it uses as inputs, but there's always also the option to use the Copernicus services to develop your own indicators based on the basic variables that are there. But if you want to discuss, and if you would want to discuss this in more detail, then we can do that later, of course.
Okay, thank you. For me, it was clear, Eline. So I have a look for another question. If someone have another question, please use the chat so Eline can answer the question. So it was a very nice illustration of big data. So a lot of advantages of this way of working, but there are no questions coming for the moment, Eline. So Celeste, I propose we go to the next speaker, and if there comes another question, we will take it afterwards. Bye.
Yes, thank you very much, Ina and Eline. Now we go on with our next speaker, Dr. Carmen van Mechelen from Hogeschool PXL.
Hi everyone, I'm going to share my screen with you. Okay. So, hi, I'm very glad to hear the previous presentations. They were very interesting. Let's see if I can skip. So I will talk about a bit for the moment, a smaller project. It's a pilot study in Limburg, Flanders, and it's about nature roofs with local vegetation. So a small slide to tell you who we are. So a university college, but with 10 centers of expertise. And we do a lot of projects in collaboration with and to provide solutions for companies, government, social profit organizations, etc. So my research center is PXL Bioresearch, and it focuses on 3 domains: biodiversity, public green, and molecular biodetection. So just some of our topics on the biodiversity. We have one live project going on about the bullfrog, and we also do some monitoring of aquatic and terrestrial systems. And on the other side, the public green, and those are mostly my projects about sustainability and biodiversity on green roofs and walls. We also look at restoration of soils and ecosystem services of soils, trees, green solutions, etc. So green roofs and biodiversity, how did it all start? In 2011 at the University of Leuven with a PhD. And afterwards it continued at PXL with a small project, biodiversity on extensive green roofs, with a lot of input of our students. But then this continued in this project towards nature roofs with local vegetation, where this presentation is about. And now I'm happy that there is a follow-up project, Green Roofs Up, that just started this October, and it's a TETRA project with financial subsidies of the Dutch government. And next next to these projects, we also involved in a bigger project, SBO, Project EcoCities, and it's together with University of Hasselt and the University of Antwerp and WTCB. And another project, Zoomdak, with the company IBIC, to look for new seed mixtures with plants that are attractive to pollinators. So there are multiple projects going on at the moment. So this project was in collaboration with Greenyards, Zinco, which is a big green roof company, and also the University of Hasselt. And we started by thinking about a problem. So we see that there are many sedum roofs. Almost 3/4 of the green roofs installed are covered with sedum. Sedums, yeah, they offer nectar and pollen for bees and butterflies, but research has shown that it's mostly interesting for generalist species, but that the interest for rare insect species and other vertebrates is questionable. So, and if you know that there are so many habitats and plant species that need protection, we were thinking, can we find some opportunities to solve this problem? So there is a big need for studies that evaluate biodiversity on green roofs. And this brings us to our research question: which Flemish natural habitat types and plant species could be implemented on semi-extensive green roofs? So we had 4 work packages. So the first one is about how to tackle such a natural roof in reality, what could be possible and what is not possible. The second one, there we estimated some climate adaptation parameters. So what is the advantage of such a natural roof? And then the third and the fourth work package, it's more about how if your roof can handle the extra weight, and if not, are there possibilities to fix it? And is it easy to monitor the functioning of a green roof? So how did we start? We looked at all the possible vegetation types in Flanders by looking at Natura 2000 habitats, and it was kind of an elimination process. So for example, water-dependent habitats were eliminated, like swamps. Also, the deep rooting systems like forests were not applicable. And also, for example, so coastal dunes, which are dependent on wind dynamics, were eliminated. So in the end, we chose for the species which Nardus grasslands, which have code 6230. Why? Because it's a threatened habitat type, but it offers a lot of possibilities on to be implemented on green roofs. It has also many red list species, a lot of butterflies, for example, and the pH, so the acidity, is slightly higher than heather vegetation, so it's more, so we thought, it was our hypothesis that it would be more easily implementable on green roofs. If you look in depth to the Nardus grasslands, they can be divided into 3 types. The more dry and acid, and it has the code HN, which is used throughout this presentation. The other one is more moist and acid, and with the code HMO. And the last one is more dry and calcareous, and it has the code HNK. And each of them has some typical plant species. And based on the plant species lists, we selected the seeds that were available. And for every type, we made a species mix with 18 species for the experiment. So the second part was to find a good substrate for this Nardus grasslands on green roofs. So we looked at the literature in first instance, but also we did a soil analysis. And these data were compared with the German guidelines for green roof substrates. So it was the intention to develop, together with Greenyard, an adapted substrate, which was kind of an in-between solution between what is possible on a green roof, so it cannot be too heavy, etc. But also it has to be good for the plant species, so it has to match the natural conditions of Nardus grasslands. So in the end, Greenyard came up with two substrates, A and B, I call it here. So A was for the dry and the moist Nardus grassland types with a slightly lower pH, between 4.5 and 5.5. And the other substrate for the calcareous Nardus grassland was between 5 and 6. Then we could start our experiments. We have an indoor experiment and an outside experiment. So first the indoor one, we used 27 empty green roof trays and we filled it with either substrate A or B and some sod from a natural Nardus grassland. And substrate depths varied between 6 and 20 centimeters. And also in half of the trays, we added some biochar because it has potential positive effects on the growth of green roof plants. And then, of course, in the end, our special seed mixes for the 3 types of Nardus grassland were added. And this plant growth was then followed up for 4 months. So this is a picture from the beginning when the plants started to germinate. Then we took some pictures, and with a computer program, it could measure the pixels, the green pixels, and it's a measure for the plant growth. And then our main findings of this experiment. So unfortunately, we didn't find any significant effects of the vegetation type, the substrate thickness, or the addition of biochar, but we did make some observations, including that the moist Nardus grassland has the highest potential of the 3 types, that a deeper substrate, in this case 15 centimeters, is advised for better plant growth and germination. Biochar, it seems to have a positive effect on plant growth after some months, but not in the beginning. And we could see that many species from our seed mix did germinate. So the species mix was successful in this indoor experiment. Then the outdoor experiment, there we used 11 wooden constructions of 11 meters square, and a sensor system was installed in them, which measured the substrate temperature, the soil moisture, and also some environmental parameters. So also this here, the plant growth and the sensor data were followed up for an entire year. Just a table to show you all the conditions we used. We also have a control condition, and we have 2 different zinco substrates that were also tested in this experiment. And the drainage layer, in all the conditions, it's 4 centimeters, except in the moist condition, where we used a deeper substrate of 6 centimeters, which can hold more water. Here you see some pictures of the installation. So our students could help, of course, with this installation. You see the different substrates, and below you also see the 2 different drainage layers in the plots. So here are main findings. In total, we found 51 plant species, and we see that after October 2019, the species richness and the cover is about to drop in all the conditions. And sadly, this is because I don't know if you remember, but we had some long, dry and very hot periods in spring and also over summer. So, and this experiment was mostly with herb species. So they really suffered from these weather conditions. But what we could see here is that there is a trade-off between the 2 zinco substrates. For example, the dark blue line, it has the zinco extensive substrate has a very high species richness in the beginning, but the cover is much lower. And if you look at the green line, this is the zinco-lavendel substrate. It has very low species richness, but the cover is high. So there is quite of a trade-off. But more importantly, if we look at our tree Nardus grasslands conditions, we see the gray line for the moist condition. It has the most potential here in terms of cover and species richness. This figure, just to show you, you see the circle diagrams are mainly colored in red. So this means that there are many spontaneous species coming from the surroundings and much less of the species mix plants that germinate here. If we look at the data of the sensors, so here you see for August the volumetric water content, and it's much higher in the moist condition. So this remains moist for a longer period, and it's due to the thicker drainage layer, but it's also positive for the plant species growing on it. And here, if you look at the temperature, so in this graph, it's for a whole day, and the horizontal blue line indicates the air temperature, and it's set at 0. So at noon, you see the orange line. The difference between the air temperature is lowest. So this condition, HN, so the dry Nardus grassland, offers the best temperature buffering. So these are just some of the results we got out of this experiment, and we made some biological preconditions out of them. For instance, the thicker the substrate, the better for local herb species, and this is also found in literature. We found a trade-off between the temperature and the water buffering. So you have to choose there the dry or the moist Nardus grassland type. But if you see that the moist one has the highest potential to be implemented on green roofs, I think you can make a choice there. And also very importantly, there is a need to change the mindset, because if you use nature roofs, you see the herb species, they can suffer from drought and high temperatures, and the green roof will not always be green all year long. So, and also, if you keep in mind that spontaneous species will get installed on your green roof, then you need to keep that in mind. It's all good for biodiversity. In this case, you're helping biodiversity, but you have to know it's a dynamic system. It is not green all year round, and that's something that many people don't know yet. So what will the future bring? So in essence, it is our goal to improve the knowledge of local nature roofs, both by further research and by sensitizing the industry, the government, and also private individuals. And this way, nature roofs can positively influence biodiversity by acting as stepping stones between nature reserves. So there are many exciting challenges ahead, many problems to solve, and we are always looking for international partnerships and collaboration in European projects. So this was my presentation, and I would be happy to answer your questions. Thank you.
Thank you for the for the interesting presentations. I will switch over to Ina.
Yes, I have looked. Thank you very much, Celeste. I have a look at the chat, but at the moment there are no questions for Carmen. Perhaps they're coming. And yes, there's a question from Untitled for Carmen. Do you intend to train architects and construction companies on using more local nature and providing habitats when building green roofs and walls?
Well, I have to say so. Maybe you noticed it in my slides, but there is a new project that just started, and that's called Green Roofs Up. Mm-hmm. And we intend to work together with the whole green roof industry to look at the regulations, the Flemish regulations we have at the moment of the WTCB. So we will have a clear look at them and try to give them an update. And of course, considering vegetation, I will recommend there in the guidelines that the green roof industry and the government would promote more local nature on those green roofs. So we should go to more nature roofs, biodiversity roofs with implementation of this local nature. So this is something that is really important and that I really want to pull forward, let's say.
But for example, they can use your input in the at the Hasselt. There's an architecture school over there, so perhaps you can go to your neighborhoods over there.
Yeah,
so
they are also contacted. So it is we want to, if we have guidelines and some construction manuals, they will be used by universities and university colleges. For the building students, the green management students, architects, etc. So we will implement it broadly.
Okay, fine to hear that. So I have another look to the chat. I don't see any questions anymore. So if someone has a question, please use the chat. We have still a few moments. Perhaps, Celeste, I let you give the closing word. And when doing the closing words, I will also have a look if there's any question left. Okay?
Okay. Thank you, Ina. If all the questions have been asked and answered, there's nothing left for me to do but thank the speakers for their fascinating presentations and thank everyone who joined us in this VLEVA webinar. All attendees will receive the recording of this webinar, and thank you for joining us, and hopefully until next time.